Colleagues, welcome. I call this meeting to order. Bonjour tout le monde, c'est un grand plaisir d'être ici avec vous.
Good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you this morning.
Acknowledging that we are meeting on the unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation, and welcome to meeting 3 of the Standing Committee on Natural Resources. Today's meeting is taking place in hybrid format pursuant to the standing orders, and members are attending in person in the room. And the second hour, some of our witnesses will be attending via Zoom. But just before we continue, I would like to ask all in-person participants to consult the guidelines written on the cards on the table. These measures are in place to help prevent audio and feedback incidents, and to protect the health and safety of all participants, including and especially the interpreters, our amazing interpreters. You will also notice a QR code on the card which links to a short awareness video. I would like to make a few comments for the benefit of our witnesses. Welcome, and of course our members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. And for members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, there's a raise hand function, as you know, and the clerk and I will manage the speaking order as best as we can. And we appreciate your patience and understanding in this regard. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted on Thursday, September 18, 2025, the committee is commencing the study of development of critical minerals in Canada. A lot of consensus among committee members that we should start with this study, very important for our country, for your communities. And I want to thank the clerk for receiving the witnesses and reaching out to some of them already. We have a fulsome panel today in hour 2 of four witnesses that are in this space. We will normally try to only have 3, so we have more time with each of those witnesses. And thank you, colleagues, all of you, for your lists of witnesses. The clerk has received those, and she, I think you know from those who have been in committee before, that we do leave it to the clerk to reach out and to assemble witness panels as they are available, and try to balance between the parties and hopefully get down the list. And so I think with that, Madam Clerk, I think we can turn to our witnesses. And I would like to welcome our witnesses. On the first panel, Isabel Chan, Senior Assistant Deputy Minister, Lands and Mineral Sectors. Our panel is all from the Natural Resources Department. Kimberly Lavoie, Assistant Deputy Minister. Nok Wei, help me.
It's Nokwewash. It's an Algonquin word for sweetgrass.
Okay, just like it's spelled. Thank you. Amanda Wilson, Director General, Policy and Economics Branch, and Andrew Gattas, Senior Director, Critical Minerals and Center of Excellence. You will have 5 minutes for your opening remarks, and I know that colleagues will be anxious to ask you questions. So your time starts now.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you to the committee members for the invitation today. Je vous suis reconnaissante de nous donner l'occasion.
I appreciate the opportunity to speak today and to contribute to your study on critical minerals.
Assistant Deputy Minister of Lands and Mineral Sector at Natural Resources Canada. Les minéraux critiques constituent le fondement.
Critical minerals are the foundation upon which modern technology is built.
Political competition and the drive toward rearmament have changed the calculation on critical minerals. They are no longer just economic commodities. They are strategic assets essential to our national and economic security. Le Canada est doté d'énormes richesses.
Canada is endowed with enormous resource wealth spread across critical mineral-rich regions from coast to coast to coast, including rural, remote, and Indigenous communities.
Holds one of the largest known reserves of rare earth elements globally, estimated at over 15 million tons in 2023. Canada is well positioned to be a leader in responsible, inclusive, and sustainable production of critical minerals. And the growing global demand for critical minerals represents a generational opportunity for our country. Canada is already the top 5 global producer for 10 critical minerals with the potential for more. In 2023, Canada has 46 critical minerals mines and 31 processing facilities, as well as 171 advanced stage critical minerals projects. La stratégie canadienne sur les minéraux critiques.
The Canadian Critical Minerals Strategy, launched in December 2022, has laid a strong foundation for critical minerals development in Canada. Through the strategy, Canada's whole-of-government approach to critical mineral development is collaborative, forward-looking, iterative, and long-term.
It involves 15 federal departments and agencies, as well as collaboration with provincial, territorial, Indigenous, industry, as well as other Canadian and international partners. In the first year of the implementation of the strategy, Canada already saw a 15% increase in the domestic production of key critical minerals. We intend to extract, process, manufacture, and recycle critical minerals in Canada by building up every part of the supply chain at home, maximizing economic growth and employment. Bloomberg New Energy Finance has consistently ranked Canada at or near the top of its ranking for the battery supply chain and for overall critical mineral production competitiveness. We have also announced funding for a number of strategic programs to help advance Canada's critical minerals, including working with provinces and territories to build infrastructure to get mining projects online faster, including the $1.5 billion Critical Minerals Infrastructure Fund. The development of critical minerals value chains also represents a significant opportunity to advance economic reconciliation and grow the Indigenous economy through jobs, services, and ownership opportunities. Through the Critical Minerals Research, Development, and Demonstration Program, Canada is supporting the development of new processes and technologies and assisting project proponents in bringing their technologies to commercial scale. For instance, the Government of Canada, alongside Saskatchewan, have supported the Saskatchewan Research Council's vertically integrated rare earth processing facility with a $21 million investment. Canada needs more mines and processing facilities to come online to support domestic industries and to help our allies diversify sources of supply for dual-use applications. To this end, the government passed the Building Canada Act in June 2025 and created the Major Projects Office in August. Le Canada collabore également avec les pays alliés.
Canada is also working with allied countries to foster the development of secure, non-concentrated critical mineral supply chains.
Under Canada's presidency, leaders announced the Critical Minerals Action Plan and welcome a new Critical Minerals Production Alliance to urgently address supply chain vulnerabilities, promote international cooperation among like-minded countries, as well as leverage Canada's resources to become a reliable and leading supplier. Canada has what the world needs, and our minerals are no longer just economic drivers. They are strategic capabilities and key components of our national and economic security. Alors, merci encore, et je me ferai un plaisir de répondre.
Thank you once again. I'd be pleased to answer any questions you may have.
5 minutes right on the dot. Thank you, Ms. Chan. So, colleagues, over to you for questions, and we're going to start with Monsieur Martel at 6 minutes. Monsieur Martel, please.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Merci
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for coming here today. First of all, when we hear that we have a great deal of critical mineral wealth here in Canada, what we mean is that the mining projects have a problem to come to light. It's always complicated. The delays are interminable, and it discourages investors. There's a lot of bureaucracy, and often these things don't ever see the light of day. So, and this is what we're hearing regularly. We hear complaints about the bureaucracy. What can you say about that? Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for the question.
To bring a mine online, there are a number of steps that need to be undertaken. And through the critical minerals strategy that Canada has launched in 2022, we are taking steps to support mining projects to come online faster. First of all, as I noted, there's the Critical Minerals Infrastructure Fund to support the infrastructure needed to bring our mineral resources to market. Secondly, I would note, as I noted earlier in my remarks, regarding the G7 Critical Minerals Production Alliance, because one of the challenges our mining projects are facing is not only just the regulatory steps that need to be seeking approval of, but also the fact that it is very challenging these days to raise the capital necessary to bring the projects online. And hence, under Canada's presidency, we are launching the Critical Minerals Production Alliance to bring our the supply side as well as the demand side and match them up in order to support our projects to come online.
Oui, mais
Yes, that's all well and good, but it doesn't guarantee that the projects, when they get here, will take less time being terminated. Over the past 10 years, how many projects do we have underway in Canada that have actually been completed over the past 10 years?
The exact number, Mr. Chair, I would provide to the committee in writing over the last 10 years. But I do note that currently we do have 46 critical minerals projects that are active, as well as 31 midstream processing sites that are online. They would have been part of the last 10 years projects that we've supported to come online. So, but I'm happy to provide, Mr. Chair, the answer to the question.
et si vous pouvez me dire,
How much time did it take to implement these projects on average in terms of years? How many years did it take to get these projects up and going? If you could please answer that question.
There are a number of factors that affect how long a mine takes to come online. There are numbers reported out there that are 20 years, but I would note too that there are a number of mines that can come online in a time frame much less than that. And that's precisely why too that the Major Projects Office was established, is to help support, to fast track, especially those projects that are important to our national interest. And so the number would, on average, that's reported out there is 20 years, but I do note that there is a range. Some actually do come online much faster than the 20 years noted.
oui, est-ce que vous êtes capable?
Can you acknowledge that the federal regulations is excessive and could discourage investors and undermine the economic investment into Canada? So investors sometimes want to go elsewhere because the regulations are too cumbersome.
Regulations that are not just at the federal level. Resource development is also under provincial and territorial jurisdiction as well. But I would note that, in fact, the certainty that our regulatory regime provides when bringing on mining projects is actually also noted as a positive because it provides actually certainty for the investment sector. And I would note that through Natural Resources Canada, we have established the Centre of Excellence that provides a navigation support to our mining projects to navigate not only the provincial, territorial regulatory regime, but also the federal regime to support the navigation of regulatory.
Excusez, Madame Isabelle, est-ce que...
Pardon me, but when we talk about the environmental assessment, Quebec has a system. The federal government has one. What's the added value that the federal government can bring to the table?
I'm going to turn to my colleague, Kimberly Lavoie, for that question. Thank you.
So, merci beaucoup pour la question.
Thank you for your question. We have a federal system and a provincial system. As you said, the Government of Canada has an Impact Agency of Canada, which works very closely with all provincial jurisdictions.
Our efforts. We have a substitution agreement with BC. That is the only jurisdiction at the moment. But we are welcome and open to having substitution agreements with all provinces, and I understand that conversations are underway with Quebec.
Thank you, Mr. Bartel. We can come back to you a little later, so save that question. Mr. McKinnon.
Thank you, Chair. So as we're getting started on this study, I think I'd like to, the concept of critical minerals is a bit blurry to me. I wonder if we could expound on what do we mean by critical minerals? What does it take to be a critical mineral?
So thank you very much, Mr. Chair, for the question. There are currently 34 critical listed on the Canadian Critical Minerals List. There are two specific criteria that needs to be met in order to be on the list under Canadian definition. So number one is the risk to our supply chain. Two is that there is a reasonable chance of Canada producing it. There's also three additional criteria, one of which is whether it supports the green transition, as well as whether it is a critical mineral that we could produce to support our ally needs. The critical minerals list is updated was first created in 2021. We recently updated it in 2024, which is a commitment that we've made, that we would look at the list at least every 3 years to ensure it is up to date and reflects the current demands in the market.
Okay. So it's not a case of, well, this is iron or this is steel, therefore it's critical. It's a matter of how it impacts our economy and how it impacts our defense strategy and so forth. Is that correct?
That is correct. And I would also note, too, that in terms of the development of the list, we also consult with our provincial and territorial partners, industry, as well as Indigenous groups. So there's also a reflection of the market demands, what we are able to produce here domestically, but also looking at what our allies need, as well as a full, robust consultation that supports the creation of the list.
So I'd like to build on Mr. Martel's questions a little bit. I'm very interested in the relationship between the provincial and federal regulatory environment, and how can we streamline that, and how can we improve that?
Thank you very much for the question. So, like I was saying, we're a federation and we have different systems, and mining by and large is provincially regulated. It's only federally regulated once it gets to a certain threshold. So as I started talking about, there is an opportunity to have cooperation agreements or even substitution agreements where the province does one process for both the provincial and the federal government, and that will lead to much earlier decisions. We're having conversations around what those arrangements could look like, how we can work together not only in the environmental assessment process, but also on the permitting side, because there's often times where we require similar information for different permits that are either federal or provincial. And so we're looking at cooperation for permitting as well as cooperation on the environmental assessment. The goal is to get those assessments down to under 2 years for all projects.
So you mentioned you have an arrangement with British Columbia, which is my province, so I'm glad to hear that. So could you tell us more about that?
Sure. So the British Columbia Environmental Assessment Office conducts assessments that are for both Canada and BC at the same time. And so Canada relies 100% on the information that BC provides in order to be able to make its decision.
Thank you. So, as you know, Reconciliation Day is coming up, so it gives me cause to ask of how the development of critical minerals in Canada can present benefits for Indigenous peoples, and are there any projects around and available that are going to facilitate their Indigenous-led operations and Indigenous equity?
Thank you very much for the question. So the short answer is there's lots of opportunity for Indigenous peoples and all Canadians, and there are projects. I would say in the natural resource sector, about 70% of all natural resource projects are within 100 kilometers of an Indigenous community. And so for many of these communities, it is the only or the major source of income for those territories. In the mining and in the critical minerals space, there are a number of projects that are working really, really closely with Indigenous partners, where Indigenous folks not only get benefits from an impact benefit agreement with the company, but also have opportunities through programming in the federal government, like the Indigenous Natural Resource Partnership Program, but also have opportunities to have an equity stake in the project. And the Indigenous Loan Guarantee Program is a program that is designed to enable Indigenous equity so that they can have a long-term revenue stream coming out of those investments.
Okay, thank you. I've got less than a minute left. So a lot of our projects are in the southern part of Canada, but the Northwest Territories and Nunavut, to me, represents a huge opportunity that is relatively undeveloped. So do you have any idea what kind of opportunity exists up there in the far north?
Yeah, short answer, please. Yep.
The mining projects that are available is actually on Natural Resources Canada's website. There's actually a map where you would be able to find the various projects. I will note, too, that of interest to you may be also the Critical Minerals Infrastructure Fund. We actually supported a number of infrastructure projects in the north to support the projects that come online, but also supporting the communities as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Go to Monsieur Simard. Colleagues, I think you know we are being televised. I believe my mother is watching, so I'm going to be on my best behavior. And I know Canadians will be very interested in this topic that has great interest among all of us around the table. Monsieur Simard, 6 minutes.
Je me demande pourquoi.
Why are you telling me this just before I start speaking? I won't take it personally, though. Before beginning, would it be possible for you to table all of the financial measures provided by Resources Canada? You talked about an equity program for Indigenous communities. I'd like to have more information on that. So if it would be possible for you to do this, I'd appreciate it. Very quickly now, the critical minerals. Our researchers have done an excellent job by providing us with a list of these minerals. In 2024, asphalt was added, but the problem is that there doesn't seem to be a linkage between you and funding. Some minerals don't have the same tax benefits as others. So when I talk to people, I ask them, what's the point of being on the list? What are the tax benefits of this? Do you have any discussions underway about that?
For the question, I would say, first of all, tax-related questions, it falls under the mandate of the Department of Finance, and therefore I cannot expand further on tax related questions. That being said, I do want to note, as noted, there are a number of other programs under Natural Resources Canada that could support the projects under the 34 critical minerals on our list, up and including phosphorus. We do have ongoing conversations with our mining project proponents on an ongoing basis, and currently the second call for proposal under Critical Minerals Infrastructure Fund is still underway, so that is open for application.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. I've received comments from the mining sector on regulations, but we discussed that earlier. That's a problem. But also, the department's perhaps not very agile. Let's say there's a startup mining project in La Vallée de la Mont. For the time it takes to go from the feasibility study to the permitting process, often we can't use the money that's offered to do the feasibility study, so that puts a bit of a brake on things. When you're on the the critical minerals list, you're supposed to have some type of an advantage. So I think it would be good to have a discussion with finance so that the process is simpler, so that because people on the list think that they should have some advantages. If you have any information on this matter, I would really appreciate receiving it. Later on, we're going to be hearing from people. Well, you mentioned this in your opening statement. We're going to be hearing from people that have projects for rare earth projects, and they want to be able to work together with their partners to get this going. It's quite a complicated process. I'm wondering what type of funding is available from natural resources for R&D projects, for projects that are looking to reduce their risk before going to market. Thank you very much. There are several questions there. I'll try to deal with all of your questions before answering a question about rare earth. I could provide you with a list of programs that support projects for critical minerals.
My colleague here, Mr. Gaddis, runs the Critical Minerals Center of Excellence that supports our mining projects to navigate not only the regulatory processes, because, while NRCan is not a regulator of mining projects, it's actually under Fisheries and Oceans, Environment Canada, as well as our Impact Assessment Agency, but we do provide that support to navigate the regulatory process. But I would also note that through the services that we provide, we also discuss the programming that's available. So to your other question regarding rare earth elements and what kind of support that we provide, first of all, I would note that there is the Critical Minerals Research, Development, and Demonstration Program. Under that program, we have already funded cyclic materials for their demonstration plant. We've also supported UCOR on the commercialization of their technology. And another important one that I mentioned during my opening remarks is also the Saskatchewan Research Council, whereby they actually have a facility that's doing rare earth metals. And then on the recycling side too, because let's not forget, while we think about oftentimes critical minerals as mining projects. Actually, the whole value chain includes also recycling as well as processing. Many of our critical minerals are actually byproducts of processing that we do. So we also have funded Mega Resources, their recycling and production of rare earth oxides. From a mining perspective, rare earth elements, we also have supported Torngat, Commerce Resources, as well as Defense Metals for their infrastructure projects. So much of this is available on our website, and I'm happy to provide to the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Chan. We're now going to go to Monsieur Millette for 5 minutes. Mr. Millette.
Thank you. So you've talked of programs that are in place
to help the industry. So I look at rare earth mineral lithium. In 2023, 520 tons were produced. But Canada has identified reserves of 930,000 tons of lithium. Now that's in 2023. Australia produced 74,000 tons of lithium, Chile 38,000 tons, and China produced 22,000 tons. How do we compete with these large producers, and how does the programs that you have talked about help us? Now, we produced 520 tons in 2023. We're in 2025. Would you be able to tell us how we've progressed with those programs in the last 2 years?
So I would address the question first by noting that we have a number of advanced projects in the with the ability to produce lithium that we're tracking and monitoring and supporting. And I'm happy to provide the list of those projects to the committee here for your study. So a couple of things that we're doing. Number one is, as I noted, the Center of Excellence providing support in navigating the regulatory as well as our programming. Two is some of these projects we are in remote areas where infrastructure is needed to bring the minerals online, and therefore through our Critical Minerals Infrastructure Fund, we are supporting those projects in that way. And then thirdly, especially when it comes to lithium, lithium can be mined. It can also be, there's technology being developed here domestically to actually extract lithium from brine. So we, through our Critical Minerals Research and Development and Demonstration Program, we are also funding technology related to that.
Thank you. How long do you think it will take us to catch up to the largest producer, Australia, with lithium in our programs? Because I know you will give us the information, but like we have a lot of work to do.
I would note that in addressing this question, I would note that through our presidency under G7, we did announce the Critical Minerals Production Alliance, whereby we are trying to bring together the demands from our G7 allies and bring forth our production here domestically to showcase what Canada has to offer. So that work is underway in order for us to be able to address not only the ability for us to bring our mining projects online faster, but then also address the demands that our allies need. I think there is definitely more work that needs to be done, especially because in this market where many of our projects are facing price volatility. It is not just a matter of going through the regulatory process, but it's even the challenge in raising the capital needed to bring our projects online. And as such, initiatives such as the Critical Minerals Production Alliance, as well as our programming, including the Indigenous Loan Guarantee Program, and that important in order to support some of these projects, especially when it comes to the capital market and the ability to raise that capital.
Thank you. So you've mentioned infrastructure. 66% of industry representative flagged the lack of infrastructure as major barriers to investment. I know you talked of the infrastructure fund. How do companies reach out to that fund?
Mm-hmm. So I'm gonna address it by first saying that the Critical Minerals Infrastructure Fund was launched last year, and we already have announced over 30 projects that are now going to be funded under the Critical Minerals Infrastructure Funds. Because to share your note about the importance of infrastructure, we do know there is a need, and as such, the Critical Minerals Infrastructure Fund set aside $1.5 billion to support infrastructure. So since the last year, we closed the first call for proposal. We're in the midst now looking at the second call for proposal. And we are actually working with our provincial and territorial partners to identify priority projects to fast track the assessment too. So we do know the infrastructure needs are there, and we are trying to address that as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Monsieur Mallette. We'll now go to Mr. Hogan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you all for being here today. Greatly value your contributions as a former public servant myself. Deep appreciation for the knowledge, expertise that you bring, and I'm so glad we get to direct some of that towards this study. So some of the items we're looking at, as my colleague Mr. Millett was mentioning, include infrastructure solutions, like Mr. Smar was mentioning, looking at barriers, broadly looking at ways government can support domestic production and processing. Natural resources, of course, is a provincial jurisdiction. That is hard fought in some cases, as it was in my home province of Alberta. I'm sure nobody on this committee wants to step on that. But there is, of course, a federal role. Tax policy, trade measures, environment, industrial policy, effects on demand that those policies create, strategic purchases, Indigenous relations, and more. It's a lot, and it would be easy to lose focus given that sort of broad touching of the area. So I'm hoping you can both expand on your views of the federal role and tell this committee what the most important thing we can direct our efforts towards supporting domestic production and processing would be.
Thank you very much, Chair, for the question. I would note that collaboration with our provincial and territorial partners is essential to develop natural resources development, because natural resources development fall within provincial and territorial jurisdiction. I would note that there is good collaboration underway at the officials level. I would note that there is the Intergovernmental Working Group, whereby my colleagues from the provincial and territorial governments get together on a regular basis to go over our priorities. And as I noted too, under the Critical Minerals Infrastructure Fund, we actually solicit input directly from the provincial and territorial governments to identify which infrastructure projects would be most beneficial and would support priority projects within each jurisdiction. And finally, I would note too that in July, we did have our Energy and Mines Ministerial Conference, whereby Minister Hodgson, along with other ministers, talked about various important priorities that we can advance together collectively. Thank you.
And the second part of that, where you think we could put our focus and what would provide the most effort or most benefit if we focused on?
I think number one is, as I noted, the challenges that many of our project proponents face when raising capital. So you would have noted that Natural Resources Canada, working with our provincial partners, have actually co-invested in projects, one of which is the BC Highway Project. Another one is the transmission line BC Yukon Grid that falls under the Critical Minerals Infrastructure Fund, very much looking at the collaboration and also maximizing every dollar that we spend to ensure they've spent in the right areas and the right projects. Another focus I would say too is looking at every part of the value chain. As I noted before, let's look at the rare earth elements value chain. It is not just a matter of getting ores out of the ground. It is also supporting the technology necessary to do the separation all the way to permanent magnets. So how we can support many of these nascent industry here domestically to bring them into commercial scale would be another areas of focus. So coming back to the question, looking at every part of the value chain would be important.
Okay, thank you. That very helpful, and I appreciated your comments about coordination with the provinces and territories. I think we'd all agree, totally essential. You noted in your opening remarks, Ms. Chan, that 15 departments or agencies coordinate activity in this space. In a practical sense, how do you keep them coordinated? And maybe I'll illustrate with a story from a stakeholder I met yesterday, where ECCC and DFO provided different lists of Indigenous groups that they wanted consultation with. Now, I've worked in government. I know it can be tricky, and I know NRCan is not at quote-unquote fault here. But if you could speak to the internal coordination role that government needs to play in your view of how it's working, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you for that question. So I would say that number one, in terms of funding various projects, we actually have an internal governance structure that brings together the 15 different departments, along with, for instance, Canada Infrastructure Bank, Canada Growth Fund, as well as our Export Development Agency, in order to look at projects. So then that way, when we fund a project, we are actually coordinated. And to your point about our regulatory work. So through our Critical Minerals Center of Excellence, we provide that navigation service to support. And we do note that there is work also underway to look at how we can streamline the provincial, territorial, and federal impact assessments as well. So that work is also underway. I don't know if my colleagues have anything.
Our time, unfortunately, is wound down, but you can wrap that into another answer with a future question. Mr. Samar, 2.5 minutes.
Merci. Je vais faire ça vite parce que je vais...
Thank you. I'll do this quickly because I would like to table a motion. The Center of Excellence, how many projects did you support in the past year?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. So the concierge service acts as a bit of a single window for industry. So what they do is they reach out to us and then we help direct to the available supports that a particular firm may need, subject to where they are in advancing their project. So what we do is we help them interface with maybe the appropriate program where their project may qualify. I think I don't have the specific figure off the top of my head of the number of firms that we've supported, but it's close to
Merci.
100 plus.
Merci. Si vous pouviez...
Thank you. Could you perhaps table this info with the clerk, with the committee? Would be good. I'm sorry. I would like to present motion. Mr. Chair, I'd like to go back to the motion. Good work between Claude and my friend Richard. So I don't think we'll discuss this motion to great length. I don't know if everybody has been able to read it, but very quickly, that as part of the study on critical minerals, the committee undertake a parliamentary mission during the week of October 14, 2025 to review the Northern Corridor project and phosphate mining projects, and to visit the Port Saguenay facilities, the Bagotville military base, and the surrounding rail infrastructure. That the committee, during this visit, meet with the Conférence Régionale des Préfets, the Promotion Saguenay organization, and any other witnesses the committee deems relevant. During the same week, and that the committee traveled to Sudbury to discuss the mining projects in Northern Ontario and their transportation needs, and that meet with any witnesses that it deems relevant. That the committee chair instruct the clerk to prepare the draft mission, including the draft budget, and that the observations made during this mission be added to the report of this study. As I was saying, Mr. Chair, we had a previous discussion between Claude, Richard, and myself. I think everybody is in agreement with it. The idea behind this is to look at the infrastructures for critical minerals, looking at the Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean area and looking into the rail transportation linkage between these areas. I don't think that there will be any debate on this matter, but I wanted to quickly table this motion, and the clerk can do the rest of the work. We're talking about a tight deadline here because we'd like to travel on October 14th.
For debate? Seeing none. Consensus on the committee, and Madam Clerk, I understand this goes to the liaison committee from here, so there's a whole process involved, but we will be transmitting that it had unanimous consent from the committee.
Consensus.
What a great consensus. This resource committee has always worked like this. Do I have any time remaining? Do I have a little bit of time out of my 2.5 minutes? No, you do not.
Pardon? We are now on to Mr. Rowe. Welcome to the committee, Mr. Rowe.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question today is about the mining sector and our GDP. I'm wondering if you guys could elaborate on the real change in GDP for Q2 of 2025.
Thank you for the question. The mining sector contributed to 6% of Canada's GDP in 2023, but with respect to the specific quarter that you mentioned, we'll coordinate with Statistics Canada and bring that answer back to the committee.
So, with comparison to the mining sector GDP and the GDP of the overall country and the overall economy, do you know how that's comparing with that? If it's on par, if it's below what the whole economy is doing as a whole?
I would note that definitely the mining sector as a whole is a key contributor of Canada's GDP. And I would also note that the mining sector includes those mining projects that are beyond critical minerals. So I'm thinking of gold, diamond, that are also part of the mining sector. Happy to work with our Statistics Canada colleagues to provide the information that you're seeking.
So, from what I'm being told, and I'm being told that the mining sector is actually, the GDP is reducing at 6 times greater than what our economy is right now. So, whether that's entirely true at 6 times, there's still a major concern that the mining sector GDP is decreasing at a higher rate than our economy, which is concerning. So I'm wondering, I'm being told it's a long time, 18 months to get a mine up and running. I'm wondering how many projects are still stuck in the regulation here in Canada.
So that information would be available from our Impact Assessment Agency of Canada, so we can submit that, Chair, to the committee's study.
So, as I just mentioned, I'm being told it takes, close to 18 years to get a mine from start to finish here in Canada. I believe that some of you guys have worked with supply chain and global markets. When things happen in global market, like we've seen in Ukraine, where uranium, big topics happen about uranium and these big shifts, what are some things that we can put in place to really get our country to compete and change to and adapt to global markets faster than the 18 years?
Thank you for that question. As I noted earlier, I think one of the initiative that's already being undertaken is to address the regulatory permitting. As my colleague Kimberly Lavoie noted, the one project one review or substitution that it's underway with the province of British Columbia. And I would like to come back to the note that I made earlier too, that sometimes the challenges in terms of the timeline is not just when it comes to regulatory permitting, but it's actually the challenges in raising the necessary capital, because you can imagine mining projects are very capital intensive, and with the price volatility such as lithium, rare earth elements that we see, it is the one of the biggest hurdles many of our projects have to face.
So I'm glad you raised talking about one of the difficulties is raising capital. I worked in the mining industry, and oftentimes mines will close because interest rates go up, taxes go up, and there's a lot of barriers. When the mines do close, it seems to be a common practice, or it's rumored in the mining industry that other countries will end up purchasing these mining sites just so that they remain closed and purchase the rights to those areas, and then open them just long enough and then close them again. Is there anything that the Liberal government is working on right now to prevent that from happening, to make sure we don't have foreign interference in our mining industries stunting our growth?
Thank you for the question. I would note that there is already legislation in place, Investment Canada Act, that allows our colleagues at ISET, Industry Canada, formerly known as Industry Canada, to look at some of these transactions to ensure that it is for the net benefit of our country as well as from the perspective of national security.
So with these programs that you're talking about for helping capital, is there an emphasis on allowing Canadian companies, but more so Canadians, to participate in the mining industry? Perhaps, it's better tax breaks or less capital gains tax for Canadians who want to invest in the mining industry to help raise capital for that?
30 seconds, Ms. Chan. Yeah.
I would, that question I would allow my colleagues at Department of Finance to answer. As noted, tax policy falls under their jurisdiction.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you to you both. And Mr. Danko. 4-5.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm really appreciating this discussion this morning. Very important information for our committee and for Canada as a whole, so thank you for being here. My first question is a bit of an expansion on an earlier discussion on regulations and the regulatory process. And you had mentioned that, you know, mining is provincially regulated, but there's also national labor and environmental standards. And of course, Canadian industry, whether it's mining or refining, is probably some of the most environmentally friendly in the world, and also has probably some of the highest worker protections in the world. So when we think about critical minerals, we're often thinking about some horrific working conditions, really low wages overseas, and thinking about the regulatory process in Canada is often criticized as a barrier to development. But I want to turn that around and ask you a question: is the Canadian regulatory process that protects workers and protects the environment, how is that a competitive advantage for us in our allies around the world who are looking to make sure that they are investing in environmentally friendly and good working conditions?
Thank you very much for that question. I would note that, in fact, many of our G7 allies are very seized with labor standards as well as ESG standards. In fact, out of the G7 Leaders Summit, there was the announcement of the Critical Minerals Action Plan. In there, the first pillar is about creating a standard-based market to recognize in the Western world, as well as amongst our G7 allies, where our supply chain do value the need to adhere to labor standards as well as ESG standards. So that work is underway, and we are hoping and looking forward to working with the French presidency next year to continue the work in recognizing not only our regulatory standards, but also labor practices as well.
Thank you. The second question is going back to some of your earlier comments on critical minerals being a really important part of our national security as a country. And you also spoke about the opportunity for our allies, G7 countries and allies around the world, to lean on Canada as they diversify their critical mineral supply chains. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to expand on that national defense aspect of developing critical minerals, and if specifically if there's any individual areas where we need to focus.
Thank you very much for that question. I would say that there's actually a number of critical minerals that are dual use. So they have a defense application. I think about graphite. So they have a defense application to it, plus as well as an application to green transition or battery storage. And then I also think about rare earth elements as well, whereby just 2 pounds of it, just under 2 pounds of it goes into a EV, or so a certain amount also goes into the production of F-35s. They're essential to, while the amount compared to the whole production of an EV may seem significant, but it's essentially crucial to the production of that supply chain. So we do note that the rare earth elements especially is one that's a highly concentrated supply chain. There are also export measures that have already been imposed. And so we are actively working with our project proponents as well as our allies to build the resiliency needed when it comes to the supply chain related to not only defense application, but also green transition.
Thank you. Last question I think we'll have time for is, as global technology is rapidly evolving and the needs of industry around the world is also evolving, in particular, for example, the EV market, battery technology, that kind of thing, and it takes a certain amount of time from research and development to scaling production. How do we as a country scale what is needed in the market versus production? How do we keep track of that, and how do we make those investments based on what's actually needed in the global supply chain?
Thank you for the question. I think this is precisely why we have developed the critical minerals list. is to look at what the world needs, what it is that we're capable of producing, and focusing our energy and our resources in order to invest in the right types of projects, the right types of critical minerals, to be that trusted supplier for the world.
Colleagues, that brings our time to an end. I know I've learned a lot in this hour.
Pardon, Monsieur le Président.
Pardon me? Sure.
I just wanted to mention that Mr. Rowe asked a question regarding to the officials regarding what the Liberal government might be up to in some respect.
Yep.
I would like to remind all members that officials are here in a strictly nonpartisan manner, and they don't
Okay,
represent the Liberal
I don't think
government in any
that's
way.
debate, so.
Oui. Monsieur,
So
Monsieur
I
le Président,
will,
simplement, rapidement,
Mr. Chair, very quickly, it's not a point of order, but I have some written questions that I'd like to submit to the officials to facilitate the analysts' work.
And we will welcome the next panel. Thank you. problems sorted out. So, Monsieur Fournier, you've got about 3 minutes and 45 seconds. So please, and I think for the interpreters, they can handle it, but please speak in a measured way. Thank you.
Ce que je mentionnais où j'étais rendu, une
Hi. So we're very close to the mining industry, so we work very closely with them, and that helps with our research and development programs. We work with major mining corporations, and in the consortium, we play a key role with the same approach. We work in a collaborative way, and we work with various partners at the table. That way, we avoid the situation where each company develops its own project. So we work in collaboration in order to reduce risk. We share costs, and we share the risks as well. With such an approach, I'd like to mention one particular aspect, that is the industrialization of critical minerals in developing technology. We have a tendency to we see technologically as being something based on basic research and development and then marketing, but the reality is that we develop procedures. That's a lot more complicated, and we need to bring it up to scale. And we do this through the consortium. We work at the pilot stage, and we go take the project right up to the demonstration phase. So this all happens before the marketing side. Unlike other ministers such as RNNR, the procedures are not as well known, but there is a lot of risk as well. So we try to share the knowledges when it comes to the concentration and extraction place. We deal with metallurgy. We do all these procedures right up to the production phase. So that is what we do through the consortium. Thank you very much.
Merci, monsieur.
Speaker, Monsieur Simard, you have 5 minutes or less.
Bonjour tout le monde.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for your invitations. I would have preferred to be with you in person, but I'm talking to you from Chibougamau in northern Quebec. I graduated in geological engineering from the University of Quebec in Chicoutimi, and I've been a member of the Ordre des Ingénieurs de Québec since 1986. I have 16 years of diverse experience in the mining industry in Abitibi and in the Nordic Quebec region. Since 2001, I have been the executive director of the James Bay Joint Action Committee.
Your lip, there we go, and so that the interpreters can hear you a little more?
On his upper lip.
On your upper lip. That looks good. Thank you. Thank you very much.
OK. Donc,
Since 2001, I've been the executive director of the James Bay Joint Action Committee, and where we actively participate in the decision-making process for the development of northern Quebec based on planning studies.
You have to take your hand off the microphone. It's preventing the sound from getting through. So sorry about that. We're having a few technical issues today. How's that look, Madam Clerk? That looks perfect. Please continue.
We actively participate in the decision-making process for the development of northern Quebec based on planning activities, studies, and objective and critical economic arguments. For several years now, the TJSCM has been doing studies to demonstrate in a measurable and quantifiable manner the relevance of doing the processing studies on critical minerals near the resource in the James Bay territory. These studies were conducted for the James Bay Regional Administration, the Société du Plan Nord, the Cree Nation government, and the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry. We have clearly demonstrated that the savings in transportation costs and in GHG emissions could reach up to $1 billion in less than 10 years for advanced lithium projects in the James Bay region. These savings would offset the costs of building a secondary processing plant near the resource. This is contrary to the Quebec government's current vision, which prioritizes Bécancour. Our studies have also shown that without secondary processing, very few critical mineral projects have positive economic potential. We are living in an historic period in terms of global demand for critical minerals. Canada has the opportunity to contribute significantly to this demand. Currently, our development strategies are not competitive, and our environmental analysis processes are too cumbersome and unpredictable. This situation does not make it easy to attract major companies that have the expertise and scale necessary to exploit these deposits and carry out further processing. The metallurgical processing of critical minerals, such as for lithium, requires a significant supply of natural gas. From this perspective, and in the context of national security and economic security, the creation of a national northern transportation corridor, including a gas pipeline, is essential for globally competitive industrial development and to facilitate overseas exports. Let's remember that Quebec's resource regions have reached another level in their development with world-class further processing plants. For example, there's one in Abitibi, Temiskaming with the Horn smelters, in Saguenay-Lac-Saint-Jean with aluminum smelters, Côte-Nord with its aluminum smelters and its iron pelletizing plant, Sudbury with its refinery. This is therefore an opportunity to develop the full potential of our Northern Territory and become a major global producer of critical minerals. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur.
Thank you, Mr. Simard.
Questions, and we're going to start with you again, Monsieur Marchand.
Oui, merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question is for Mr. Simard. It's interesting to talk about natural gas. I hear further processing and that it needs to be close to the sites. And some people are saying it's impossible to do this. Processing a mineral right beside the extraction site. Could you please elaborate on this? Because some people are saying this is not achievable, and so we have to do the transportation first and bring the minerals. And what about the benefits of the further processing is immense. The studies that we've done have shown that it's a major benefit. It's also an opportunity, an historic opportunity to develop the Northern Territory. And in the eyes of the world, this is all tied to our identity and our infrastructure, have to be built in Canada so that we can develop these resources on our territory. So it's important to position ourselves. Canada was built from coast to coast thanks to the railroad, and we're close to the American border. So, but this doesn't promote our northern development, and we have to be able to export these products. So there's an opportunity here to occupy our territory, develop it. And I'll give you an example. Look at Scandinavian countries. They developed their northern lands. They had no choice. And we're dealing with the same reality today here in Canada. We have to seize the opportunity. Mr. Simard, we often hear that the projects take too long, the delays are interminable, the costs will go on and on and on. And it really discourages our investors. At one point, Canada is competing against the whole planet. Critical minerals, they're located everywhere. So people want to choose a place where they can get them as quickly as possible. Why can't we do that here? I know we have the regulations. It takes us twice as much time to do this. Do you have difficulty going ahead with these projects because of this? I can tell you that we often hear about this issue. Obviously, this has an impact on our competitiveness, but I'll take the example of lithium. We have 6 projects in James Bay, which are at the advanced state, but we're competing with the entire world. For example, the brine products, and there's ExxonMobil is developing a project to extract brine, lithium from brine. So this is what we're dealing with right now. We're dealing with this type of competition. The issues in terms of environmental assessment delays are significant. The quality is also something that's very important. Our ability to attract players, large players from major corporations, this is very important. And right now, we have a shortcoming. Mr. Seymour, do you think we could do anything with the permitting process when you were asking for infrastructure from start to finish? You also need a permit to do this for the railroad, and it goes on and on and on. Is there something we could do with the regulations? Because we always come up against this. Sometimes it takes 18, 20 years to get a project online. And timing is very important. So how do you deal with the lengthy process? I would answer you, Mr. Bartel, by saying that in a context when we're talking about national security, I think we have no choice. We have to be a lot more smart about our processes. We have to be more competitive to attract these corporations. How much time do I have remaining? Listen, what you're saying is very interesting. I'm just a bit curious. You talked about natural gas. We have a project in Saguenay. How important is it to go ahead with this project? It's very important when we talk about liquid natural gas and exporting. We have to recognize that it's an industrial opportunity for the Northern Territories. In the discussions we've had with LNG Quebec, we had discussions whereby a proportion of the natural gas that would go through the pipelines would be used to develop the industries in the Northern Territory. But we have to think not only about exportation, but we have to think about it as being an important development opportunity.
Monsieur Gay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'd like to thank you all for coming here today, and thank you for answering, for coming here on such short notice. The question is for Ms. Riley and Ms. Valence. You have real projects. The committee wants to know what are the obstacles that you're facing. We want to see whether the government can help you. How can we help you? So I would like each of you to talk about these obstacles that you're experiencing and where could we help you? So that's my first question. Thank you for your question. In my opinion, the first thing that we need to do is to focus on infrastructure. I'm in the Northwest Territories, and we have rail service that goes as far as Hay River and Great Slave Lake. But in 2023, there was a fire, and there's a problem with CN Rail because it doesn't want to repair the line. That means with the dams on the lake, to bring them directly to the boat, we need to have this rail line. So this is very important to us. I think it'll cost about $15,000 or $15 million to do this. The other thing, we've contacted the government. They're quite prepared to talk to us and come up with solutions. But the big problem in my mind is that they try to put the problems in a box. It has to fit in a box. If you don't fit the box, it doesn't work. So that's one of the problems that we have. Whew.
If you're not in the Critical Minerals Infrastructure Fund, well, then you go into the Strategic Innovation Fund. If you don't go into the Strategic Innovation Fund, well, too bad for you. Good luck. Ben, c'est un peu ça.
So that's what it's like.
That come into the funding requirements. And so from our point of view, in terms of the rare earths in particular, we have some very key issues that need to be addressed in terms of the processing, in terms of the collaboration, which is exactly why we came up with this consortium. The thing is that rare earths are an essential opportunity for Canada to have a seat at the global table where we would produce a lot more than we would use. And we need to take this opportunity. The market is just starting to turn now. This is an opportunity. We don't want to miss the boat. As Monsieur Martel said in the lithium space, there's a time and a place for everything. Rare earths is today. So I pass it to Madame Valence.
Merci, Elisa.
Thank you. Infrastructure, that's important. And with the Commerce Project in Nunavut, we're in the far north, so we're quite limited in terms of infrastructure. Where it becomes complicated is getting people to work together, because a project such as Commerce cannot support on its own all of the infrastructure that would enable it to develop northern Quebec. Regardless of the infrastructure that's going to be developed, it's got to involve many different parties or stakeholders. Every project, and Mr. Simard raised this point, he talked about lithium in James Bay. I was involved in a lithium project in James Bay in the past, and Mr. Simard talked about the Route du Nord, the northern route, and we have to get some projects are farther away. And we need, everybody will say the same thing. Whether we're dealing with the provinces or the federal government, we always ask you how we can come up with a way to install infrastructure that will be to accelerate the whole project from coast to coast. And nothing happens. Nobody takes a leadership role to get all the companies that are sitting around the table to work together. We have a territory that needs to be developed. We know that this will create a lot of vitality in the northern communities. How can we get everybody together and define together what we want? Because we can go and see each person individually, but often we hear, yes, we want a program like Lisa's, but we, as a proponent, as a mining proponent, we do our studies, in-depth studies, to understand what's the best scenario for us. But we don't necessarily understand the scenario for the other players, so that is very important.
En fait, je dirais du côté les défis.
The challenges. Getting projects online, that's also linked to the technology. Iron ore, well, we understand the process. We do have to go to the pilot scale, but when we deal with rare earth elements, we have to develop a lot of this as technology is coming from China and Germany and Europe, and we have to work on this and do so quickly. Mr. Simard? Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Fournier, and to the other witnesses. I would invite you to submit to the committee a document on infrastructures, because we have tight deadlines, and this will help the analysts and I won't try and sell you this whole idea of a corridor. I'll do that later on. Well, actually, I've already done this with you, but from you, I'd like to know. I find that the consortium is a great idea. I'm no specialist, but I do understand the discussions that you're having. And I know that you're dealing with a risky technological process. But now, with the support of the federal government and the support, we talked about the Indigenous program earlier. Perhaps you could speak further on that. What can be done to ensure that things get underway? What tool do you need? What can we do to make sure that these projects do get underway? First of all, as Cindy said, we don't have anyone championing our case to help us get funding in order to get our consortium up and going. As I mentioned earlier, there are all these boxes. There's a whole. So what we're wondering about is how do we get a box for us? What about this center of excellence? No, that doesn't work. We were never offered that. We tried. We knocked on all the doors, but it was never offered. Tomorrow morning, the consortium's there. You have two offices in Quebec, one in Alberta. I'm not sure. It increases the possibility of developing rare earth elements. Does that help? Yes, absolutely. If we get to the marketing stage, if we have two, everybody producing a concentrate. I don't want to get into the whole process. But metallurgy is a second phase. But if there's a central place for one company, that would represent $600 million. So that we need cash. If we put our resources together, we'll need less cash to do this. And the fact that we have got a pilot underway, it shows that it can work. And other companies will want to also get involved in rare earth production in Canada, and that will accelerate everything and bring us to the production phase. So the consortium is like an accelerator of rare earth elements. You are both involved in this. There's an interest. There are lots of players. I don't know if anybody else is interested, but all of the players that work in this sector are dependent on China. We understand. You think everybody would, if we don't have that, you're going to work in a silo, everybody doing its own thing. So can we save 5 or 6 years if we work together? A minimum of 5 years. I know that you've approached the federal government, and to date, we can see that you don't match with the programs that are offered. R&D acceleration doesn't come under NRCan. There's no program, no funding program. That's why we have decided to come here to meet the federal government. We're meeting with, I think we've seen all the departments. There are programs available, but our project, because of the very nature of the program, we have a window of opportunity here that may close very quickly. Take the example of lithium. Not long ago, it was the flavor of the month, but now we find ourselves in a situation where we're on our backs with that. So that's why the whole idea of a consortium is to decide how we can work together. It requires a lot of investment. Right now, we're doing metallurgical studies. We need to do studies as to the procedures and processes so that we all get to the same point. So our project is innovative. It's outside the box. That's why we've approached the department to ask them whether there's any way we can have some type of portfolio for the consortium that will bring together R&D, innovation, and the pilot tries and work together. I think Claude is able to do that this at noon or this afternoon.
We're going to go on to our second round, and at the will of the committee and the members who are in our slot 4 and 5, I'm just going to suggest the last 3 speakers, Monsieur Simard, Monsieur Rowe, and Hogan, have 2.5 minutes each. We have an in-camera item to deal with, and we have to take a little pause in order to go into camera, just so that we finish close to on time. I wonder if that's acceptable to committee members.
J'ai pas de souci, mais
I have no problem with that, but I think that we have to let the witnesses have an opportunity to table briefs because we're dealing with a complex issue.
And all witnesses are invited to submit briefs, even ones that we will not be able to hear. So thank you very much for that, Monsieur Simard. So we're on to Monsieur Millette.
Thank you. Question pour Madame Valence.
I have a question for Ms. Valence. Australia, the United States are ahead of us in terms of project development. What do we need to do? You discussed this, but what do we actually have to do so that we remain in the game? Earlier, I talked about infrastructure, investments, another thing. Mr. Simard talked about how difficult it was to get the feasibility done, but when we're in the exploration phase, we have some programs. We're all familiar with those in Quebec. This enables us to identify the potential of a project, but when we get to the project phase, when we need to do more in-depth studies, exploratory projects are not as available because we've gone to another step. Often they're going to wait until the company, leave it up to the company to do the feasibility. So we're at the mercy of companies that have a project defined in terms of critical minerals. They need to fund these projects themselves and also at the same time getting investor capital. So how we're going to be able to do this? The government could perhaps have a more upstream investment as a project is being defined in terms of its feasibility, because that's where everything starts. Because with such a study, preliminary economic study, that's the sketch. We're not necessarily defining all the engineering details here, but at least it'll be tied into, aligned with the situation. That's why we need some funding. We need funding to help us do this.
Continue what Madame Valence has said. What can we remove in federal policies to be able to move faster? Are there certain things that can be removed?
Well, I think
that are a hindrance, that are stopping us.
Well, I think that people bring up the environmental assessment piece, which people bring that up a lot. I'm lucky in that my project went through the environmental impact process or the environmental assessment process before it was bought by us. So there are only new elements that we have brought to the party that will need to go back through the EA process, which is a much less onerous process than somebody who's coming with a new project. So I'm lucky that I'm able to cut out some of those things. But I think that the concept that was mentioned earlier by Isabella Chan about consolidating provincial and federal review processes makes a huge amount of sense. That would very much streamline things across the board for mining projects, definitely. That would be one of the most important pieces, I think, apart from the concept of, as Madame Valence pointed out, funding. So,
Thank you.
thank you.
More pointed question. Do you find that the federal government's current approval process discourages investment?
I
By
don't
the time
think
it takes and
I don't think it does actively discourage. I don't think it does. I think Canada is a fantastic jurisdiction. We have amazing natural resources, but I do think that well, we've come at it in a different approach, which is very rare in the mining industry, which is working together. Right? In the mining industry, generally, it's this is mine, I'm going to do it, and we're coming at it from a different approach. I don't think there are people who are discouraged from coming to work in Canada. I do think that having a more active situation, I think that there's been a lot of talk about Indigenous investment in projects, which I think would be incredibly useful. And I think the Indigenous Loan Guarantee Fund is something that gets thrown around a lot. It's not a vehicle that works for mining companies at a certain level. It is for a much lower risk profile of investment than, at least in my experience and in the conversations I've had with Indigenous communities and their access. So I think that the concept is one where all of the communities, my project sits on the land of 4 different nations, and they all would like to be investors, and they'd like to use that Indigenous loan guarantee, but they can't in the way it's structured right now for an investment in this project.
Thank you. And we're on to Mr. Danko.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to dig in a little bit to research and development and processing, because I think there's a real value add there for Canada. So my question is mainly for Monsieur Fournier. Developing procedures to production, and it takes time to scale, especially with evolving technologies. So my question with research and development, and coming from a riding with 3 post-secondary institutions, very research heavy, what challenges do you see moving the pilot projects that you're working on to scale within industry?
En fait, merci pour la question.
Thank you for your question. The demonstration part, working with existing technologies and work with developing new technologies, this is going to be key to ensure leadership in terms of technological development. Bringing things to scale is very risky. There are significant costs involved in bringing things to scale. And from the idea of the consortium to work together and ensures that each group doesn't have to develop its own procedure. So collaboration is very important. It allows us to get things done quicker. So we have an approach where time is against us in some respects, and we've been working with, at Quorum, we've been working with major companies for 25 years, and we can see the benefits involved with doing that and how this can reduce risks and improve benefits for the sector.
And you're working on a number of demonstration projects. So what specifically is the difference between a demonstration project and when it's at scale in industry?
En fait, tout est une question de volume.
It's a question of volume. When we work in the laboratory, we are working with kilograms or a few kilos. At Quorum, we are specialized in working in pilot projects. We're talking But when you get to the demonstration level, you're talking about thousands of tons and 24 days of the week. We do everything we can to reduce the risk that's involved with the project.
Merci.
You talked about in your opening remarks on competitiveness and evolving technologies. Something that's a big interest for me in evolving research. Like we talked a lot today about lithium, for example. Everyone in the world is doing research on how to change battery chemistry so lithium's not required, along with motor technology that don't use rare earth magnets, that kind of thing. So in your view, what weaknesses are there in Canada's critical mineral supply chain, particularly when it comes to processing and refining in the context of evolving technologies?
I will say partnership with not only inside Canada, but also outside Canada, making sure that we don't reinvent the wheel. We identify the most promising technology. And again, it can be inside Canada and outside Canada, and working in a real partnership to increase and accelerate the development and the deployment of new technologies and processes.
Thank you. Of course, critical mineral development has various areas of Canada that are impacted differently. So just changing gears a little bit, looking across the country, are there specific regions of Canada that you see as real potential for success when it comes to critical mineral development? And are there different barriers depending on different geographic regions, both political, as well as just remoteness of
I think
places?
it's better than it was. If I speak for the research and innovation, let's say, component, Lisa mentioned in our consortium, we look forward to work with universities, other research centers, and also federal labs like Canmet Mining and NRC. So we have to make sure that we don't duplicate the work, we work all together. So I see at the Canada level, it's, let's say, more and more we have a unique approach instead to see the regions working along in their side.
Thank you. Thank you. So our last three slots, Monsieur Samar, Monsieur Rowe, and Hogan, 2.5 minutes or less.
Bon, c'est très court. Pour faire ça.
Not much time. To summarize what you've said, and for analysts as well, we have infrastructure issues. We need to be more agile in terms of providing funding. And also, we have programs that don't always meet the needs of the sector. You've talked about the fact that the BDC doesn't support mining projects that have gone beyond the feasibility study. So I think that's important to point this out for our analysts. I understand it's difficult for the federal government to come up with a source of funding. What I thought about in Lac Saguenay, we're trying to make the product carbon neutral, but with the government of Quebec, there's a type of government funding linked with federal government. I don't know what the amounts are, but perhaps in the discussions that you're going to be having with the federal government, perhaps this is a model that you could look at. I would like, there's no single window. When you make a request for funding, you go to NRK, you go to finance, do you go to industry? When it comes to critical minerals, there's no single one-stop shopping. So maybe that's part of the problem. We will also be tabling a brief on that. Excellent. We've done our homework. And if you want to table anything else, well, the it will be very good for our report. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. My first question is for Mr. Simard. 60% of industry representatives flagged the lack of infrastructure as a major barrier to investment. And Mr. Simard brought up the pipelines for natural gas. And I was in the heartlands in Alberta, and I seen that they were taking ore from all around the world to Alberta because they had cheap natural gas to refine it. I'm just curious if you'd be able to elaborate on how that plays with the high grade and low grade ore, and how we can potentially unlock more ore and more production by bringing the energy to the ore rather than the ore to the energy. If you could explain the correlation of that.
For RNNR,
Critical minerals that would require mass amounts of energy, such as natural gas, to produce.
as I said earlier, in terms of National Northern Corridor, we have no rail line. So for a national gas pipeline that would be used for exporting overseas, there's a whole issue of the social accessibility. We have to make the people realize that this will be beneficial for industrial development because part of this natural gas will go through the pipeline and it will be used for metallurgical processes, such as for lithium and for high. Same thing applies for other rare critical minerals. So this whole issue of being able to the pipeline would enable us to develop opportunities and for metallurgical processing near the resource in northern Canada.
Yeah. So do you think that Bill C-69, if that was repealed, do you think that would increase mining investment in Canada and be able to increase the production of critical minerals?
You're talking about C-69 on major projects? Yes, let's hope so. Let's hope that this will be the case. But people, and in C-69, there's no explanation of what that means in terms of exports. In the explanation of this bill, we have to explain the opportunities that it represents for developing the North and our industry.
Wrapping up, 2.5 minutes or less.
Okay, Monsieur le Président, nos invités. Merci.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the witnesses for coming. Like Mr. Martel and Mr. Kay, I have some questions about competitivity. So my question is, unfortunately, I'm going to have to switch to English.
Current Indigenous opportunity grants. What would your recommendations be to strengthen and foster stronger Indigenous partnerships while meeting Canada's obligations, both moral and legal?
I'm a finance person, so I have thought about this extensively, so I really appreciate the question. Thank you very much. I think that there is a way of structuring a vehicle that would allow for Indigenous investment, that the risk would be shared by the company who got the investment, the equity investment, and by the Indigenous Loan Guarantee Fund, in a way that basically it would be like a preferred share. This is going to be way too much detail probably, but it would be like, oh, okay, perfect. It would be like a preferred share, and they would be interest payments, let's call it, in the preferred share stage. There would be interest payments because a lot of the Indigenous communities need to have periodic payments. And so the company would have to hold 3 years of rolling payments in escrow. and then after that, when the company was in a position to be able to pay out that same amount of interest payment, it would convert into ordinary equity, a different class of ordinary equity that would pay out dividends first to those communities equivalent to the interest payment. And then you turned it into a lower risk pipeline-like investment. That, to my mind, is what I've been looking to do for a while. So,
well, colleagues, let me, on your behalf, thank our amazing witnesses
Monsieur le
today.
Président, je veux juste souligner que
If I may, most of the witnesses have a very busy workload. They decided to come here at a very brief notice, and I'd like to thank them.
Going to express on our behalf. You are our very first witnesses of the new parliamentary session. You've started us off in a good way, and some themes have emerged. The great opportunity, the barriers, the infrastructure needs, and so this puts us in a very good mindset for the rest of the study that I'm very, very excited about, and I know my colleagues are. Let's hear it for our witnesses. So, colleagues, we're going to go into camera. We need a few minutes to do that, so I will suspend, and then it should be a very brief item so that we can get you on your way. Suspend.